Alright, part 2. Right, so a brief history of time. If you haven't seen part 1, go back and see part 1, because it sets the stage for what I'm about to say. Now, if we can't have elections that ought to be free, and we are generally assumed by the global elites to be cash cows, sheeple as some people have started calling us all, then what is the point of Parliament? This is more evidence that I've found to prove this next point, which is that Parliament is purely there as a boys' club. It is there to give the appearance, the colour of the law. But if you need at least a few £1,000s in your bank account to pay for leaflets, canvassers, petrol and all the other costs associated with a parliamentary election, how can that be freedom? And of course, if it is a nice little boys' club for those blue bloods that are related to the Rothschilds and the House of David, as I've talked about in other videos, then you've got plenty of money. You just basically write a blank cheque, send it off, and you've got how many notes that you want. But if you're an honest and decent, upstanding guy that this week was set to pay off all of his social fund loans, totaling about £2,500 over the last 10 years, and if your intent is to fix a broken system, like a mechanic would swap your exhaust if your exhaust rosts out, right? Then how do you get elected if you've got no money? Or if you've got no party backing you up? Or, thirdly, if you don't have the support and the coverage on our modern technological telecommunications devices like the BBC. Now, next year we have a council election, and I am going to, despite the hardship of losing £2,500 of my income this year, out of an income of 11,000, that'll leave me about £1,500 to spend on phones and related costs. How am I going to bloody feed myself? There's also a video that I posted before the election that said to you, under no circumstances send me any money. Because it was an experiment. I set it up, maybe I should have done a video about my thoughts, about my predictions for how this election was going to go for me. Fuck the Lib Lab Con, fuck them. But how it was going to be for me and what the end result would be. And I think I made a couple of points about it in various videos in the lead up to the election. But I've at least proven my point that the whole parliamentary system, in parallel to the corporate system, in parallel with the religious system, is purely and simply designed to steal your money. That is the only conclusion I can come out with from this recent general election. Now, while the Lib Lab Con were talking about austerity measures and the economic cuts that we the people have to make and the sacrifice we have to make, that was a key word for the election, was sacrifice. You elect us and you will suffer. It's basically what the three big main parties said. And there was people like me and Harvey and Martin Bell and Nigel Farage and all the other independent candidates standing up for our values, our beliefs, in perhaps the misguided view that we had free elections. that if you, the people, liked what we said, you would vote for us. In my case, you obviously, 248 of you voted for me. I voted for myself, making it 249. 3,500 voted UKIP, because obviously they want to go out of Europe. And then the remainder voted for either a red, yellow or blue candidate. And in other constituencies you had the English Democrats, you had the Christian Democrats, and so on and so on. But essentially you had the choice between three main parties, which is conclusively proven to be owned by the Rothschilds, the Vatican and the military dictatorship, which is currently under the authority of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, who to all intents and purposes is the second Messiah, or the Messiah, the King of Kings, right? If she's like the figurehead and she's like rented America to the Americans, she's renting Boscombe to the Boscafari, and so on and so on, right? Then what is the point of bloody Parliament? Why do they run the charade of a general election? And next year we're going to have council elections. Now, because I look like a punkish clown, and I positively refuse to compromise my appearance or the integrity of my appearance, because I am honest. I am a decent bloke. I don't care what I look like. I'm sat there in front of the computer reading the Welfare Reform Act 2007. I'm there watching the Ring of Power on YouTube. I'm there sending off emails to the Justice Department asking for an exemption to a £500 deposit that would basically make me fucking bankrupt, etc, etc. So while you may think voting for a bearded monstrosity like me, it may be a bad idea, think about who else you got to vote for. I mean, next year it's going to be the same circus. Lib Lab Con, all fighting each other, promoting the government Rothschild's view that we've got to have sacrifice, we've got to have austerity measures, and all those kinds of things. And then there'll be independent candidates like me and a few others in Bournemouth. I even know a vicar, a bishop that's going to stand. Although I don't quite know how he's going to rationalise his religious beliefs with his secular government position, because you can't do both. But we're going to have the same circus next year. But the law says these elections ought to be free, and then it costs you 55 million quid to get elected, because that's how much the BBC charges you for their exclusive coverage of your party political machinery. And I'm sure that the same thing happened 75 years ago when Hitler was running for election. He obviously had the black shirts going around mugging people and creating this atmosphere of fear to intimidate the voters into voting for him. And then they had the Reichstag fire, and that basically sealed it for the fascist dictatorship. And then 75 years on we had 9/11, July the 7th, Mumbai, Madrid, and all sorts of other things intimidating us into voting for the Lib Lab Con, because we all need a strong and stable government, don't we? So maybe the only choice I've got to make as an independent council candidate for next year's local council elections is whether I should ask you guys to donate to the cause. Now, what I try to promote, what I try to suggest to you is that I'll design the leaflets, I'll post them on Facebook, and then you print them off. Now that would be a really good way of getting around this. Elections ought to be free. Because I'm a designer by trade. I mean, I must have designed 30 leaflets, posters for this recent general election, and no one I know of printed them off. And then I'm constantly meeting people who have said, oh, if I'd known who you were, I would have voted for you. And I guess 26,000 people had the same excuse for not voting at all. Anyway, this is the end of part 2, and I think I'll roll myself a cigarette and join you for part 3 in a moment. Ciao.